All right, we'll call this general committee meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening, and Councillor Hakey's joining us virtually. So thank you, Councillor Hakey, for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, any disclosure of pecuniary interest this evening?
Mr. Chair, I see none at this time.
All right, we do have a presentation this evening, presentation of the 2025 draft budget, and Mr. Freeman and everyone has their budget book, and Councillor Hakey's, when you get back, yours will be in your locker at City Hall.
Thank you.
Whether you want it or not. And
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Your Worship and members of Council. It's good to be with you this evening and to present the staff recommended 2025 draft budget. I have a short presentation this evening and just want to hit some of the highlights. You've got the printed copy in front of you. Of course, that's for your reading pleasure later on, but just want to kick it off with providing a summary of some of the key highlights that you're going to see in the budget document. Of course, staff are simply presenting the draft recommended budget this evening. We're simply asking Council to receive the presentation. No decisions are necessary tonight. And as I just shared a moment ago, this presentation is very much a high-level overview. The budget document that you have, the budget highlights book, that's going to form the basis of our review. And just on the inside cover, actually, of that document, there's a high-level report, summary report from staff on behalf of CAO Reyna and myself as the treasurer, talking about the draft budget. And it hits on some of those highlights in written form. It includes a number of staff recommendations as well as some other supplementary information. The budget document and the highlights book does include information both on the operating and the capital budget, so highlights from both. As well, it includes information of items that are not recommended, certainly items that were on our radar. Important items, but not necessarily included in the budget. As well, it includes supplementary information about staffing, tax assessment, tax rates, as well as a whole section at the back on user fees. So a lot of information contained in the budget highlights book. If I could just, Mr. Chairman, kick it off a little bit, just circling back to what staff presented in our preliminary estimates that in I believe it was June, and then with the follow-up direction in August. But at that point in time, as we considered the 2025 budget forecasts, we were presenting to you what we thought would be an increase that was reflective of what we've seen coming down the pipe of about 8.42%. There was some other ancillary information as well in addition to that that would have put it up around that 10% mark, but the staff preliminary estimates were around 8.42. And in the middle of the screen there, and if I'll just highlight actually the capital budget in the ensuing conversation and deliberations, Council expressed the desire to, make sure that in the draft budget forecast coming forward, there is a robust capital program. Certainly staff were proposing 2.28% of that 8.42 to be directed towards capital financing. As well, and you can see at the top of the list, there were some items that weren't fully dealt with in 2024's budget. One of them being the tax ratio reduction that staff were proposing that would shift the burden of who's paying for tax in our municipality. That did require the express approval of the Minister of Finance, and as of the printing of this budget document, that is yet to be forthcoming. So that is an outstanding item from last year that is carried forward into the 2025 budget in front of you this evening. As well, there was use of one-time reserves in 2024 to reduce that all-inclusive rate. And again, we know, and you've heard it from myself a number of times and my staff colleagues, when we use reserves, we tap into them. It's great to have reserves. They don't deal with the problem, they defer the problem. So now we're back dealing with the problem in 2025. And so you combine those two things, And then what were staff anticipating? So that third, the fourth line there, that 3.92 staff, when you break it all down on that 8.42 staff back in June, we're proposing that we felt we could deal with 2025 issues at less than 4%. Now, Council deliberated staff's response at that time, and you provided direction to us to come back with a budget at 5%. And so just to compare the two, and if I take what you directed to me as treasurer and how that shakes out with what that preliminary estimates were, you can see on the capital financing, a lot of the numbers are the same. What is the monies we're going to infuse into our sanitary sewer program? What's the amount of monies we're going to infuse, new monies we're going to infuse into our stormwater protection? What is that enhancement to the capital program at 1%? It's that other capital requirements staff have pulled back, and you'll recall back in June, what I was proposing to you was to close that delta, close some of the budget risk, that if we had to go out to the capital markets and finance that everything that was on the books, I wouldn't have the money to do it. And I was proposing to actually close that gap, that financial risk. However, with that 5%, we're not going to be able to do that. We're going to have to go forward with accepting some of that risk into 2025. That delta that I just referred to a moment ago, if I had to go to the capital markets based upon the budget provisions and what I currently have, I'd be short about $3 million. So that number is concerning, but we're going to accept that going forward. Now, if we I'm assuming we want to deal with the tax ratio problem, or the tax ratio issue that was unresolved from 2024, and as well as the 2024 reserves one-time financing. The direction that you were providing to me was to come back with a budget and deal with 2025 using less than 1%. So just to put it into some context, you gave me a challenge for sure, absolutely. And I had my homework cut out for me. So how did we do? Well, I didn't quite get there, and you're going to say, "Well, Mr. Freeman, that's not 5%." And I'm going to unpack that for you, and I'm going to show you how we can get there. But you can see here that as we considered and took that your direction away, there was a couple of things here to just bring to your attention. First of all, on the capital budget, it is as you directed in terms of the robust response at 1.91%. The dealing with the 2024 tax ratio, dealing with the 2024 reserves and the one-time use of those, Council provided direction in terms of waste collection for multi-residential units some weeks ago, and that was 0.29%, the direction you provided. And I have been able to address everything else that you'll see at 3.38%. So that's how that kind of takes that 7.8 and unpacks it a little bit to give some visibility. I'll address the issue just in a few moments here about how we go from 7.8 down to 5. If you just bear with me for a few moments. Now, there's a number of things that will be familiar to you in the budget document that you would have seen in prior years. We call this our budget guideline page. It's page 11 of the book. And we put it out there as a one-page summary because it gives a lot of that critical information just at a very high level, starting from what is the gross spend being proposed? How much are we asking for the residents in terms of taxation? And as well, when we consider what's happening with water rates and sewer surcharge and education rates and so on, you get down to the bottom and you can see we demonstrate the proof there at 7.8%. And I realize that it's a little bit small on the screen, but you'll have it in front of you. And this book is actually online as of now, I believe, and you will be able to access that electronically. Now, what does that mean? If council were to accept the 7.8%, and we'll talk about that as I shared a moment ago, what does that mean for the residential homeowner? And as we make mention here, and I believe an upcoming slide, our assessment, our median assessment is still $260,000. The province has not changed that. MPAC has not moved forward with the province has not directed MPAC to move forward with the reassessment of residential homes. So we're still at the 2016 values pre-COVID. 260,000 is our median value. That means $145,000 for each 100,000, or $31 per month in terms of what that means for the median assessed value residential home. And you can see there I guess the slide here just gives the no assessment. That was the direction that the province has provided to MPAC, still using 2016 final destination assessments. Now, included on pages 3 and 4, early on in the book, we hit, and again, in high-level form, a couple of pages, but we bring what are the key impacts that are driving the numbers from one year to the next. Those 2 pages, pages 3 and 4, provide that high-level summary. And we do it, we categorize it out to be in terms of what's happening with personnel costs, what's happening with other inflationary factors, what's happening with revenues and so on. So we kind of classify it into different buckets, and we provide you with that high-level synopsis. Now, one of the common questions that we get is, what does a residential taxpayer actually pay, and where does their dollars go? And so we try to be helpful. We break it down into a one-pager that takes all the departments, city departments and city divisions actually, and indicates to the constituents, to the residents in Peterborough, where their tax dollars are directed. So regardless of whether they're talking about financial services, they're talking about municipal operations or community services or other organizations that council supports through the budget, then they can go to the page here and they can see where their tax dollars actually go. Now, there's a couple of things here I just want to highlight and make sure that there's no surprises when you get to these pages, because there's a few pages, there's some information here that's kind of outside the norm of what you would expect to see. But so I just want to mention them here in my brief comments this evening. There's some organizational changes council has directed through previous direction to bring water services in-house, to bring it back to city. And have it that service provided by city staff as opposed to contracted out. And that includes information technology as well. It also includes the Riverview Park and Zoo. And there's also been direction provided about economic development and tourism. And so when you get to a page like page 6, and all of a sudden you look at the full-time equivalents, and you'll see here some numbers that are much larger than what you would otherwise expect. So for instance, you can see there in the bottom section, the full-time equivalents brought over for water services. Now, the key thing you need to remember when you look at this page is that none of these are tax supported. So all of the revenues come with them in the case of water services. And we're already paying for information technology today. So the impacts from one year to the next are the otherwise consequential impacts or inflationary impacts from one year to the next. As well as when it comes to PCAT, or the spend on economic development, we've repurposed what you would have paid to a third party under contractual services to now provide that service. And if we took the time to unpack just that section, I would demonstrate to you that what you're spending, what's being proposed to spend in 2025 budget is actually nominally less than what you spent last year. So just wanted to highlight that these organizational changes, so when you get to the pages here, nothing jumps out at you as surprising. Now, we have heard, and I just want to circle back to, there was a key report. It didn't generate a lot of discussion at the time, but there was a key report this past July, I believe, that or August that brought forward an asset management plan, an update plan to council for your consideration. And at that point in time, it talked about the fact that we were falling further behind in our capital infrastructure. Now, what I'm going to propose to you through this budget for your consideration is to infuse yet additional monies into capital, not for 2025, but to consider it for 2026 and 2027, to actually pre-commit some additional monies instead of 1% to go to actually 2%, an extra 1%, and yet again in 2027. We've got to get away, or we got to get at that infrastructure deficit, and if we don't, it will get away on us. And so just want to give you a heads up about that. That's in the budget. It's on page 20. We speak to it. And certainly you'll hear some comments to that effect when when my staff colleagues here are talking about municipal operations or infrastructure planning and growth management and some of the pressures there from a capital project planning perspective. As well, you'll see, and I made mention to it, I think this won't come as a surprise, that next bullet point, that when you'll recall here just a couple of weeks ago, we actually debentured the Miskin Community Center. And I'll use that as an example because it's not every day we build a new twin pad arena. And so there was a fairly large debenture. A big chunk of that debenture was growth supported, tax and development charge supported. The timing of the payments of the debenture will not align with the receipt of cash from development. There will be a disconnect in terms of the timing. To bridge that gap, I'm proposing that we actually borrow monies, temporarily finance those from the legacy reserve. And so you'll read about that on page 22. I'm just highlighting it in my comments to bring that to your attention. And then the last one to bring to note is the fact that we have a local joint local board, Peterborough Public Health, that we don't know yet what the funding ask is. We've yet to see it. I've had preliminary discussions with our colleagues at Peterborough Public Health, but formally we've not yet received that. And you'll see a supplementary report from me giving to you. I believe you'll see it this Wednesday in your package, and the public will see it Thursday, talking about a merger update, where that's at, and a recommendation, a preliminary recommendation on when you might want to have further discussions about Peterborough Public Health's budget. I mentioned a few moments ago that there was other requests not included in the draft budget, certainly important to staff, and in terms of providing services to residents in Peterborough, they're included in the budget document for your perusal. Now, let's get at how do we bridge the gap between what I'm going to present to you this evening, or what's in that budget book, your budget book, and how do we get to 5%? What does it mean? And how are we going to get there? What's some ideas? So that 2.8%, the delta between the two, in dollar terms, that equates to about $5.9 million. So in rough numbers, $6 million. If you want to get down to 5%, that's about $6 million, not of gross spend, of tax supported spend. And that's key to make sure that you keep that in mind as we're looking for ways to reduce the budget. We're not talking about, arbitrarily, slashing budgets here. We're talking about getting at net tax requirement spend. In the staff report at the beginning, so just as you flip open the opening cover, the staff report, there is an appendix in that report. Appendix A, there's two appendixes. Appendix A is some draft recommendations. It's Appendix B, though, that point you in the direction in terms of some considerations you might want to make as council in your deliberations about ways to reduce the all-inclusive, the proposed rate increase, and in terms of that $5 to $6 million. So there is a schedule in there. It's pretty comprehensive. In addition to the schedule is some comments, some commentary from staff that if you want to reduce spend in any of those areas, what is the potential impact? And so we're trying to give the reader, give you, and give the residents of Peterborough, if we're pulling back in any of those areas, what does it actually mean? And so you just consider that as you review the budget document. Now, let's just play it out that for the moment here, staff are recommending 7.8. We're going to pull it back to 5 through various menu of options, or options that council may want to consider. And you will direct as you see fit. And if you don't like the ones that staff are bringing forward, it's up to you. You have the authority to look at other areas. There are some additional considerations, though, that add to the number. So in the preliminary estimates, we had included an inflationary amount for police services of 3%. As you know, police and the Police Services Board have approved a budget beyond 3%. So what does that mean to us then? here at the city. That means an additional 0.95 should you choose to approve the additional ask from Police Services Board. EMS or Peterborough County City Paramedics, same thing. They have approved a budget or recommending a budget greater than the forecasted inflationary amount that staff included back in June. That would add a 0.24 to the budget. Those two combined add another 1.19. And the third one on the list, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, is the health unit. And we're all kind of waiting on that additional information at this time. So pulling it all together, 7.8 less 2.8 gets us to the 5. The two pieces that we know, theoretically at this point in time, around that 6.19 number. Now, let's turn for a moment to the capital. So everything that we just talked about was in terms of the operating budget at $147.4 million. It is a robust capital plan, and to get at and address, hopefully, a small component of the infrastructure deficit. We have used all of available capital financing, and including things like development charges, and just to make a comment about development charges, development charges do not keep the lights on at City Hall. Development charges are funneled in their totality into the capital program, into the growth-related capital program. So as you well know, as growth happens in our community, we might have to increase capacity on a city in the roads network. So we might have to put in a turn lane. We might have to increase the size of the pipe in the ground. So we might, so there might be some underground works. There might be an additional, fire protection response. So instead of when we decommission a fire station 2, council has elected to build a slightly more robust fire station 2 to replace it to address that growth. So development charges all flow into growth-related capital works. And you can see the other ancillary capital financing sources there that have been maximized in the capital budget. And then just lastly here, just graphically, you can see it in the pictorial here, the response to the infrastructure planning and growth management. So that big purple chunk at the kind of that 3 o'clock right through to almost 6 o'clock position, and then right back up on the municipal operations. So the chunk for the finance and corporate support is the biggest by far, would be facilities, and some IT infrastructure would be included in that section. Now, council will recall last year that we stepped through the strong mayor legislation. As we know, his worship has delegated a strong mayor from the province of Ontario once again, and we will be presenting at some point, or the mayor will be presenting his budget in terms of a strong mayor's budget. He has indicated to myself as city treasurer that he wants to invite his council colleagues into the budget discussion. The budget being presented to you tonight is the staff recommended budget. And so terminology becomes important in this conversation, because I can present a staff recommended budget to you without triggering the clock on the strong mayor legislation. So all this kind of choreography becomes important. And when you're making recommendations, you're really technically making recommendation to his worship as the strong mayor to consider in his budget deliberations. So the formal legislation provides for some back and forth with council and his worship the mayor, and in terms of 30 days for once the mayor does present his budget, the council can respond to that, and then the mayor can veto it, and so on and so on. And so when you add up all that together, you end up with this length of time of about 55 days legislatively, where there could be this back and forth. And the key thing here is that council, along with his worship, can actually shorten that timeline. And once again, we'll be proposing to you that be shortened to a much, much smaller period of time. So just graphically here, we showed the budget timeline. If we were to adopt the process as written by the legislation, it would stretch it out for a number of additional days. We would anticipate, if all goes well, that his worship would present his budget, I believe, on December 9th. And if council was amenable at that time to shorten it actually to that day. And so once the mayor presents his budget, and that's after I believe all of council has provided their input into the budget process. So you can see that just in terms of the timeline here for the budget and the dates and what's going to happen at each of those, we do have some public meetings coming up, both informal as well as formal public meetings. Detailed budget deliberations are on November 18th and 19th. And, at the end of the budget deliberations, committee may make further recommendations to his worship. And then on December 9th, we would anticipate public delegations on the budget. And at some point in that process, then the mayor would table his budget. And just before I close here this evening, I just want to direct you, council, and to the residents in Peterborough to a new online budget tool. You heard me speak about this earlier in the year. Staff were behind the scenes trying to make it easier to interact with the budget, and we're pleased tonight to have a new visualization that anyone with a web browser can go on the city's webpage and they can click and interact with the budget. And in fact, I'm just going to do that right now, and I'm going to mimic, actually, if you'll just bear with me, I'm just going to mimic being a resident in Peterborough. And I have just hopped on to the city's webpage as if I was sitting at home. And I can go onto the city's webpage and I can click at Open Book. Here it's the dialog box, Open Book Budget Graphic, Charts and Tables. I can click on that and come down and I can open the budget Open Book. And I can come in here. So this is the static page I just showed you in the PowerPoint presentation, but now it's dynamic. And if for instance, I had a question about the capital budget, I can interact with that capital budget and see, what is happening in terms of the current budget. That's the blue graphic. What's being forecasted for 2026, 2027, 2028, and so on. So if I just click on one here, municipal operations, I can see that for 2025, it's $58.2 million. And we can see here some where we're proposing to spend some of that money, whether it's environmental service or transit and so on and so on. I can actually click on some of these links and it will drop me even down to the project level. So fairly dynamic. And I can, if I wanted to jump back here and perhaps interact with the operating budget, I could look and see what are we spending $411 million on in terms of operations. So I could come in, I could look at the blue once again is the current year's budget. Red in this case is the previous year budget for 2024, and then what is the preliminary actual for 2024. So I could look at community services, and that budget for community services, I believe, is $169 million. And you can see here that it's made up of social services and fire services and so on and so on. So there is an interactive budget tool here, and you can see it as well in percentages. Or if you just wanted to see a list, you can interact with it that way. So a bit of a visualization, hopefully make it a bit easier for the public to interact with the budget process. And be able to increase their knowledge base in terms of the what's being presented here to council. Just going to wrap up with some dates here. This evening, of course, the staff recommended budget, the informal public meetings, and outside agencies happening on November 12th, detailed budget review, and then hopefully anticipate on December 9th, the mayor's budget. Once again, certainly some my contact information. My budget team is with me, Ms. Poplinski, as well as Mr. McDougall. They're the behind the scenes folks that pull all this together for me and do a great job. And our contact information is there for members of council. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I know I'm a little over time. I apologize for that, but there was lots to share, and look forward to the discussions.
No need to apologize. Thanks, Mr. Freeman, as always, for that presentation and all your work. So it will be moved by Councillor Hakey. So I do have a list. Again, no debate or discussion tonight per se, but just questions of clarification if we can. Councillor Reel and Baldwin. Councillor Reel?
Through the chair, I think my question that I was going to ask Mr. Freeman has been answered. And it was probably a question of how do we get to 5%? And I think if I have to read through the book, I guess this year I was thinking a little lazy that I didn't have to read every friggin' page, that the direction from council was to go to 5%. So what happens if we don't reach 5% because I'm not married to the date of December, whenever the budget is, I'm not married to that date. So I guess I'll have to read through the book and cherry pick what I think are important or not, or come back and say, you're going to have to go back and do your homework.
Mr. Chairman, certainly the Appendix B that I referred to in the staff recommendation, that does contain millions of dollars worth of proposed service reductions that council may want to consider. It's up to you whether you whether you or not you feel that you want to reduce in those areas of the budget. That's up to council. I brought forward to you, kind of put my best foot forward in terms of a staff recommended budget, and it's up to council now if you want to get down to the 5%. And that list, should you choose to accept it, will get you very close to that. It comes with implications, hence the additional commentary.
And that's Appendix B.
Yes,
B.
Appendix B.
Thank you, Councillor Reel. Councillor Baldwin, Burke, Duguay. Councillor Baldwin?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Richard and your team, thank you. Thank you very much for all of your preparatory work. Richard, last year, council made a decision to, in order to reduce the tax rate to the individual homeowner, we took your recommendations, or staff's recommendation, I believe it was about $3 million. And then you've referenced this evening that was not accepted by the province. So I really wonder, I mean, we're saying it's the strong mayor's powers budget, but in reality, this council didn't pass the strong mayor's budget. It was vetoed by the province. So is it strong mayor? Is it Mayor Leo's budget, or is it the province's budget?
And Mr. Chairman, that's a very good question. The recommendation to adjust the tax ratios did involve the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Finance does have the authority. And I certainly appreciate MPP Smith's work as the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Finance, and I certainly appreciate his efforts to assist there. And so it did take his approval that the tax ratio, it was outside the range of fairness as determined by legislation, albeit, that legislation was put in place 26 years ago. And I guess I would say to council, that was then, this is now. And what's fair should be really determined locally. So I'll just leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. And yeah.
Well, sound like a political person saying the question, but I respect that, Richard. Given the $3 million that we were hoping to transfer to a different location, does that $3 million that we weren't allowed, is it back in this budget? In other words, where did that $3 million go? We're making it up in the 2025 budget. Is that correct?
Yeah. So two things, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the city did not ask the residential taxpayers in 2024 to make up the difference. So it's on me as the treasurer to find the difference. So in terms of the actuals. So we didn't ask the residential taxpayer to make up the difference. However, it is unsustainable to think that we could do that year over year. So it is back in the 2025 budget for your consideration. So yes,
It sounds like it's like when you use reserves 1 year and then they're gone, you gotta put the money back. So that's exactly what we're gonna be doing in 2025 and beyond.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. Use of reserves are great, but they defer the problem if we don't address the spend.
Lastly, Mr. Chair, I know we're not debating tonight. It sounds to me, Mr. Freeman, that when we go to Appendix B, to get to 5% all inclusive plus the 1.19, if council decides to go that route, council will have absolutely no discretionary spend. So I'm assuming that when councillors have a pet project or they get something that's worthwhile doing in the community, the ability to do that through discretionary funds for 2025 don't bother. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Chairman, if we were to take the time this evening and kind of unpack and go through all of the city services that we provide, and if we were to categorize them in terms of mandatory, legislated, what is essential, what is traditional municipal spend, and then what is discretionary, we would see tonight that in 2024 that discretionary bucket was about $6 million. So in broad strokes, generally speaking, if council wants to get to 5%, all your discretionary spend, everywhere that you spend money that you do not have to spend money, you need to eliminate it. That's what you need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Burke, Duguay, and Mayor Lille. Councillor Burke.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Freeman. I remember a few weeks ago, we made the decision kind of at the last hour to change the garbage. And it was kind of alluded to that there were going to be tax implications on that. Is there a line about that in terms of the big factors on the tax rate?
Yeah, there is. So, Mr. Chairman, you'll recall in one of the slides there I showed earlier this evening, it actually was 0.29. The impact of that decision on the all-inclusive rates, 0.29. And that 0.29 is included in that 7.8. Now, I've interpreted that as in addition to the 5%, and you'll recall how I unpacked the 5% to deal with the 2025 issues. Was really less than 1% if you kind of, by the time you peeled back the layers there. And so hence the adding it back on.
Thank you. Through Chair Beamer, I have a question about, I'm just skimming this as you're speaking, and I appreciate the presentation and the work. And when I'm looking at that graph about that breaks down the percentages per household or per resident, the big ones that are standing out to me are fire, police, public health, and ambulance. And is there a strategy in here for us to sort of respond back to those big asks that seem to be capitalizing a lot of our resources?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, each one of those individual asks could be whole debates and discussions and occupy actually the whole evening, just any one of them. And so when it comes to public health, for instance, you'll staff and you'll see it in the preliminary staff report. We are what's the legislation called an obligated municipality. When it comes to police services, the legislation talks about providing adequate and effective budget for police services. And so the determination by this council will be, is the budget response that's being asked, is it necessary to provide that adequate and effective response? So there's not clear-cut answers to that, and there's not simple answers to that. And so each one of those, will require debate and deliberation by council. So.
Thanks. And then Chair Beamer, I have a question that might be saved for the coming weeks, but my question is about our portion of Cavalry Church, because to me it seems like we need a big amount to make up for the shortfall situation that we're in. What are our options to do for the city to liquidate the Cavalry Church property, or look at getting some money back out of that site that's just standing there, the city's portion of it?
Mr. Chairman, I think the council has a number of options there. I think that if you really want to debate those options, though, I think it requires probably seeking at some point in time a future report from staff talking about, you know, the rationale as to why council bought the property, the strategic value of it, what could potentially be done with it, as well as ensuring that we provide space for ongoing and adequate and effective policing in our community. And you know, you have to compare all of that with the path that council was on in terms of a single facility in the downtown that would have been like 95,000 square feet. They do not come cheap. You know, that at the time was tens and tens of millions of dollars. So I think you have to weigh one versus the other. I think there's great potential there to leverage some of that property for other reasons, other priorities of council. And it is some prime real estate that, boy, the sky's the limit. I could get off on a tangent on that one.
Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Burke. Councillor DeGay?
Thank you, Chair Beamer. Commissioner Freeman, to you and your staff, thank you for some welcome weekend reading. I do have a couple of questions. On one of will the PowerPoint presentation be available to council?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Not sure who's going to get it out there, but we'll make sure it's out there.
Thank you. You do reference, and I saw posted, I think there was a reminder to council, November 7th at Healthy Planet Arena. That's a drop-in session for budget purposes.
That is a drop-in session. I believe that staff will do a short presentation probably that evening and probably reiterate a lot of what was said tonight and just one more way to interact with the public.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, if I might, and I believe Councillor Hickey is online, probably listening attentively. There was Councillor Hickey advanced a recent recommendation about some city lands I'll describe on Shamong Road, and similar to Councillor Burke's remarks about Calvary Church, we own the lands. Are there options? Is that notionally expressed somewhere within this document, or is that something that we would be addressing separately?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that would have to be addressed separately, and I don't recall a specific response to that in the budget document here this evening.
So having said that, Mr. Chairman, if I might, that would be in due course something that I believe we as a council would look forward to receiving, because it does represent potentially a newfound revenue source. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor Lil?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank Richard, Yvette, and Bill for putting this together. It's a big task. It takes a lot of work, and we want to thank you for your professionalism. I just want to touch base on the tax ratio for a moment. It's something that's always been a big interest of mine. The members of the public should know that when this decision was made a number of years ago, it effectively shifted $20 million of tax burden from the industrial commercial class to the residential class in the city of Peterborough. That was a big shift. And that shift is still in play today in terms of the numbers that are in this book. I think we need to continue to pursue this, because the reality is, when you review all the tax ratios in the province of Ontario, even with the slight change that we are recommending in 2024, the city of Peterborough is still in the bottom third in the province of Ontario of commercial industrial tax ratio. Interesting enough, some of the communities in Ontario with the very highest tax ratio also have the highest rates of growth. So there's no correlation in terms of tax ratios and growth. So I think we need to continue to do that. We, of course, are anticipating, if it goes forward, the voluntary merger of the health board to look at a possible savings that often occur when mergers occur, and we'll have that opportunity, I know, down the road. And I remind colleagues, when it comes to public safety, most people equate community safety with public safety, and public safety is your investment in the men and women that put on that uniform each and every day. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lil. Any further questions, Mr. Freeman? Mr. Freeman, thank you. All right, moved by Councillor Hakey. We'll take a vote and e-scribe.
Councillor Rial is affirmative.
And that is carried. Motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Vassiliadis. We'll take a vote. Councillor Reels in favor, Councillor Burke's in favor. That is carried. We're in adjournment. We'll take a 5-minute break and reconvene for City Council. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, staff.